This is Abelino Velez during speech number 2 for Com 101. These are my note cards. This is my audience. I'd like to think of you being in a place all alone with your own thoughts, as well as everything that's happened in your past. I'd imagine this can be quite frightening or scary, and this is what many people have experienced throughout this COVID outbreak and the isolation that it's brought. The COVID has caused many people to slip into unhealthy habits as well as mental health issues, such as falling asleep or difficulty sleeping. It can bring anxiety or depression, and there are many credible sources out there for this topic, but one that is very important is Mayo Clinic staff, which goes over people's mental health, as well as many articles on anxiety. And almost everyone has experienced everybody's experienced this pandemic, and knowing the struggles that other people have gone through might help others cope. And within this speech, I'd like to display how COVID has affected sleeping, anxiety, and depression. First, I'd like to start off how it's affected the sleep of many people. The sleeping schedule that many people have experienced has changed up because of the lockdown. Many people don't have to go to school, work, or they can't make plans with friends, so they don't have a certain time to wake up or anything to do. And Dr. Member, who is one of the directors in the Stanford Sleep and Health Insomnia program, shares how these factors have affected the sleep of people. She first answers questions that students asked, and one of the things that she mentions is financial issues that can be brought or affect people at nighttime because of what they think about. And she also goes on to tell us how disorders are made from sleeping, like insomnia and the circadian rhythm sleep, specifically the delayed type disorder. Insomnia is when people have trouble falling asleep or staying up, and the circadian rhythm sleep, the delayed type, is when people have trouble waking up in the mornings or falling asleep at a normal time. Now that I've shared with you how COVID has affected sleep, we can now move on to how COVID has played a role in many people's anxiety. A website, anxiety.org, quotes, "Anxiety is the reaction to situations perceived as stressful or dangerous, and COVID has made people both stressed out and struck danger into their lives. And almost everybody has experienced some type of stress, whether it's meeting a deadline for school or making a certain amount of sales at the new workplace that you work at. But everyone has experienced stress. Tanja Jovanik, who is the author of the article from anxiety.org, which was published on November 12th in 2019, tells us that the anxiety disorder can affect our usual functions in life, from whether it's school, work, or even in a relationship. And the stories that COVID has brought strikes fear and danger into people's lives because it can take away lives, their jobs, and put them in a dangerous place in life. And many can be struck with fear because this has affected them in 3 of those ways, or at least one of those ways. And Mayo Clinic staff, who published an article on October 15th in 2020, and this was published by Mayo Clinic, tells us that many people have increased their drug and alcohol use because they see it as a way to cope, but rather it makes it worse. And I'd like to give an example. In my household, my father, he actually lost his job, and when he lost it, he had been struck with fear that he wouldn't be able to support the family like he usually does, and we wouldn't be able to live the way we live. So that struck fear into him. And now that we see how COVID brings anxiety into people's lives, I'd like to show you how anxiety affects depression and how COVID has brought depression into many people's lives. And the U.S. Census Bureau actually tells us that depression is being shown by a third more of the Americans than before. And Mauricio Favia, who is in part of the Massachusetts General House, in that article, it was published on June 25th in 2020, states that the correlation between the depression and the pandemic is quite understandable due to the increase of factors that affect depression. For example, the trauma of the size of the disease, the fear of catching the virus, being grieving from people who have lost their lives in your family, and the distancing that people have had to do, which hasn't been experienced before, the worry about financial issues, as well as not being able to take care of others or being taken care of by your loved ones. And Lawrence Robin, as well as Melinda Smith, who published an article on Help Guide during May in 2020, mentions how depression is fueled by the isolation from the pandemic, and that's because we are social creatures and we need to be shown love, attention, as well as support. And anxiety is a large reason why COVID has grown. And as mentioned before, COVID has affected anxiety in a large way. And CNN, the news that comes out daily about COVID does not help. For example, a CNN article on Monday came out saying that we are at an all-time high with cases and the amount of people who have died and everything else. And this doesn't help. This actually can make people fall deeper into their depression and be more unhealthy. And through this information, we can see that the pandemic has affected habits that people have had, as well as the mental health negatively. And in conclusion, COVID has led many of us to sleep into bad sleeping habits, anxiety, as well as depression. COVID has changed the normal habits such as sleeping into negatives. We stay up late or fall asleep throughout the day when we should be productive. It's also brought anxiety into people's lives, and it's changed it in that way because of the depression that follows for many people. And now that you have a background of how COVID affects people, I'd like you to understand that everybody is struggling from this, and I hope that you can see that through that. These are my note cards. This is my audience.